First of all, David Rakoff, author of Fraud and Don't Get Too Comfortable. He's a regular contributor to the New York Times Magazine, Outside Magazine, GQ and Public Radio International's This American Life. His writing has appeared in Salon, Wired, Seed Magazine, Harper's Bazaar, The New York Observer and Slate. He has been in the Best American Travel Writing and the Best American Non-Required Reading. As an actor, he's appeared in the plays One Woman's Shoe, The Little Freedom Mysteries and The Book of Liz, and can be seen in the films Capote and Strangers with Candy. Born in Montreal and raised in Toronto, he's lived in New York City since 1982. What does David Rakoff find funny about America? Could it be Hooters Air? Steven Spielberg's wife sporting a bosom of unyielding architectural prominence? Or the glitter glue that is worn in a Today Show audience lineup? Let's find out. A big round of applause for David Rakoff.
Thank you very much. So we were asked to speak for 6 minutes. Let's hope that happens. No, but I can't do that. So I'm going to read for you, to you for 6 minutes. I have lived in the United States since 1982, or as I like to call it, New York City. And in around 2003, I decided that it was time for me to entrench my relationship and actually become a citizen, because it was becoming rather scary to live there, and I thought that I would like to vote in the last election, so that worked out really, really well. So this is about that. The naturalization application can be downloaded directly from the United States government's website. It is 10 pages long, but can be filled out over the course of an industrious day or two. It takes me 4 months and 1 week. I got delayed twice, although not by the usual pitfalls of questions requiring a lot of documentation over a long period of time. I have no problem, for example, with Part 7, Section C, in which I have to account for every trip I have taken out of the United States of more than 24 hours duration for the last 10 years. I have kept every date book I have ever owned. I create a table with columns listing exact dates of departure and return plus my destination. It is a document of such surpassing beauty, it is virtually scented. No, my first hang-up occurs at Part 10, Section G, Question 33. Are you a male who lived in the United States at any time between your 18th and 26th birthdays in any status except as a lawful non-immigrant? I make my living with words, and yet I cannot for the life of me begin to parse this question with its embedded double negatives and hypotheticals. Part of my clouded judgment is the fear of the bullied. I don't want to piss this new government off. I spend an entire afternoon trying to map the grammar of this one question. I come away with nothing but a headache and no idea. This is in early March. I put the form away in my drawer and I forget about it. My dreams of inalienable rights failed by just one question. Until one evening in July, 4 months later, when, as I'm dropping off to sleep, the clauses fall into place and the lock turns, and I realize that the answer is a simple no. With inordinate self-satisfaction, I soldier on. Have I ever been an habitual drunkard? I have not. A prostitute, a procurer, or a bigamist? Nuh-uh. Did I in any way aid, abet, support, work for, or claim membership in the Nazi government of Germany between March 23rd, 1933 and May 8th, 1945? 9! Do I understand and support the Constitution? You betcha. And if the law required it, would I be willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States? Again, I stop. Again, the same headache as before marches its little foot soldiers across my cranium. I put the application back into the drawer and I return to my bed, not picking it up again until 7 days later when I surprise myself by checking yes. I figure it's grass soup. Grass soup is exactly what it sounds like. It's a recipe for food of last resort that my father apparently has squirreled away somewhere. I've never seen this recipe, but it was referred to fairly often. Should everything else turn to shit, we could always derive sustenance from nutritious grass soup. At heart, it's an anxious and romantic fantasy that disaster and total financial ruin lurk just around the corner, but when they do come, they will have all of the stark beauty and domestic fine feeling of a Dickens novel. Young Tiny Tim's palsied hand lifting a spoon to his rosebud mouth. "Oh, what delicious grass soup. I must be getting better after all," he will say, putting on a good show of it just as he expires, the tin utensil clattering to the rough wood table. A grass soup situation, then, is a self-dramatizing one based on such a poorly imagined and improbable premise as to render it beneath consideration. From what I've seen on the news, for example, by the time you're reduced to using the lawn for food, any grass that isn't already gone, either parched to death or napalmed into oblivion, is probably just best eaten on the run. All by way of saying that if ever there came a time when my new homeland was actually calling up the 40-something asking and telling homosexuals to bear arms, something very calamitous indeed will have to have happened. For most of my life, I would have automatically said that I would opt for conscientious objector status, but the spirit of the question is, would I ever? And there are instances where I might. A journalist in the United States and a lifelong Quaker said that looking into the graves in former Yugoslavia convinced him that force is sometimes the only option to deter our species' murderous impulses. While we're on the subject of the horrors of war and humanity's more poisonous and least charitable attributes, let us not forget to mention Barbara Bush. And that would be former First Lady and Presidential Mother Barbara Bush, as opposed to W's liquor-swilling, girl-gone-wild human ashtray of a daughter Barbara Bush. I'm sorry, that's not remotely fair. I don't know if she smokes. When the administration censored images of the flag-draped coffins of the young men and women being killed in Iraq, the family matriarch expressed her support for what was ultimately her son's decision on television, on Good Morning America, by saying, "Why should we hear about body bags and deaths? I mean, it's not relevant, so why should I waste my beautiful mind on something like that?" Mrs. Bush is not getting any younger. When eventually she ceases to walk among us, we will undoubtedly see photographs of her flag-draped coffin. Whatever obituaries that run will admiringly mention those wizened dynastic loins of hers. But will they remember this particular statement of hers, this "let them eat cake for the 21st century"? Let us promise herewith to never forget her callous disregard for other parents' children while her own son was sending them to make the ultimate sacrifice, while asking of the rest of us little more than the promise to go shopping. Commit the quote to memory, say it whenever her name comes up. Remind others how she lacked even the bare minimum of human integrity, the most basic requirement of decency that says that if you support a war, you should be willing, if not to join those 19-year-olds, then at the very least to acknowledge that said war was actually happening. Stupid fucking cow. So that's why I answered yes, but like I said, it's grass soup.
It's the 3 Ds, I realised. Don Watson is an author and public intellectual. We need them here. Who was a speechwriter to former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating. He lives and works in Melbourne and lectures widely on writing and language. In 2002, 6 years after Paul Keating left office, Watson published the award-winning Recollections of a Bleeding Heart. His work has appeared in most of Australia's major journals and newspapers, on television, radio, stage and screen. His latest book, American Journeys, was published in March 2008. What does Don Watson find funny about America? Could it be the voice of the automated Julie he calls before each Amtrak trip? Or the difficult task of finding out which Deadwood character George W. Bush most resembled? My bet it's not Swearingen, but let's find out. A big round of applause for Don Watson.
Thank you. I find this funny. Just chosen at random. This is from a 280-pound West Pennsylvanian, the owner of a Springfield M1A with EOTech HWS EBR, also a Remington 870 Police Magnum with a Surefire front end, and a Colt Anaconda for his wife. He says, "We believe fervently in the sovereignty of the individual and the family unit. We are citizens with inalienable rights," which David had picked up, "not subjects to be ruled, Our right to bear arms comes from our Bill of Rights, and this right, as enumerated, is not granted by any local, state or federal authority. It is a recognised right endowed by our Creator upon every free-born citizen in this country. It's a right not to hunt, but so citizens may protect this country, their state, their communities, their families and themselves against those that wish to do them harm, be it a foreign enemy, their own government or some thug. Now, he'll be voting on November the 4th, and West Pennsylvania may decide who is the president. Now, just to change the president, I just won't mention the president for a moment. A little while ago I read a piece by David Sedaris which made me laugh and laugh. In part it concerned a grandmother of his and how as a child her flatulence used to make him laugh at the dinner table. Laugh so much his father kept hitting him on the head with a spoon. I was looking at his head when I first met him to see whether there were any scars, and the more he hit him, the more, of course, he laughed. Now, I laughed at this, I think, not only because it's plain funny to imagine the young David being hit on the head with a spoon, but also because I had a flatulent grandmother. And her flatulence had the same effect on me, and the scene he described used to be played out around our kitchen table, except my father, breeding us tough, used a bread knife. Now, it seems to me, if you think about that, we seem to laugh at what is both weird and familiar, the weird in the familiar, which is why families are such, whether you're American or Australian, families are the primary source of laughter. Now, families are bottomlessly funny. I mean, as recently as a couple of months ago, I wandered into my brother's sitting room after midnight and found him lying on his back, listening to Wagner's Lohengrin, conducting it with an alabaster cat and laughing his head off as it went. And he was sober. He'd taken nothing. And I had no idea he was like this after 55 years. It follows, it seems to me, that as the United States becomes more familiar to us, as it inevitably will, more like family, the more we will find them funny. Take the President, or take Tom Cruise. Take the President would be better, I think. If you take the President, and remember, those of you who are about my age will remember that in the 1950s we were very Anglophile and we thought that the Americans weren't funny. We used to go and see their films and laugh our heads off, but we'd come out saying they're not as funny as the English. They have no irony, we'd say. No, none at all, none at all. You had to look like Terry Thomas to be funny. If ever a man had no irony, it was Terry Thomas. He had as much irony as he had, between his two front teeth. Anyway, these are sort of the sort of phantoms of our consciousness. But if I could, I'm sorry to mention it, it's shameless self-promotion, but I did meet the former president twice. I had lunch with him once. There were many others there, but I met him, and I saw him eat. I had a glass noodle hung from his chin for quite a long part of the lunch. But I feel much closer to the present president, who I've not met and have not much of a wish to, although I have met him in my dreams. I dream about him quite a lot. And that's why he feels like family. He sits by the fire where that grandmother used to sit. I've also dreamt about him twice where he sits in the back seat of the car and I can see him in the rear vision mirror as I drive him around my old school and those places. It's hard to know what to make of it, I know. But this new familiarity actually makes the whole thing easier to bear, in a way. When I say the whole thing, I mean that on November the 4th, citizens of 6 states of the United States, including Pennsylvania, and it's west where that 280-pound gun owner who thinks that he owns a gun because the Creator ordained it will be voting. They won't be. The people who will decide the outcome of the election on November the 4th will not be the most educated or worldly or wise citizens of the United States, of which there are millions and millions, but they're more likely to be the least educated, most unworldly and most unwise citizens of those handful of states, that handful of states. And they will decide who will be the president of the world, as it were, as it is, our world, our president. Now, chances are that they won't make the most sophisticated choice and they won't choose the most sophisticated president. A black Adlai Stevenson? Pretty unlikely. Or vote with a view to the interests of the wider world of which we are a part. On the face of it, this is a result about as funny as a Cormac McCarthy novel, particularly his most recent novel, which I didn't laugh at all, you know, but maybe as we get closer one will be able to. Now, you look at the American electoral system and try to laugh, and you stop laughing and begin to think it would be better if the House of Windsor was running the show, and on the usual hereditary principles. But after a while, you see, you have to go there, and that it'll come here anyway. You don't have to go there, but it's a very delicate point I'm trying to make. See, once you become family and accept that you're family, you stop wanting to choose your relations. And you begin to see that the lasting pleasure and amusement of families is in the fact that you can't choose your relations. You know, you get those funny uncles, like the president. And that weirdness, after a while, begins to appear at home. So there's nothing other about the United States. It's part of you. Let it flow. In time, President Bush or a President McCain will seem as funny as your grandmother, any grandmother. So when we have a president who calls to the Italian Prime Minister, as he did recently, amigo, amigo, see, you laugh. You're at home with this whole idea. It doesn't worry you. It's nothing to be concerned about at all. When he says the trouble with the French is that they have no word for entrepreneur, with the emphasis on the nour, it's as funny as the grandmother. Or when he says something like this, he said very recently, or about a year ago, I heard somebody say, "Where's Mandela?" Well, Mandela's dead, because Saddam killed all the Mandelas. He said that. I don't know why he said it at all. It's very... And I doubt if he knows why he said it. Or his mother knows why he said it, for that matter. No one knows why he said it. And it would be intolerable in a president who was not one of us, you know, who was not a familiar, a member of the family. On that I'll end. Thank you very much.
Now, I'm sure we all have a flatulent John McCain in our heads. One of Paul Keating's funniest times for me was when he said the nation had to fight back. It was beautiful. I'm sure you didn't write that. No. With sardonic wit and incisive social critiques. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. David Sedaris has become one of America's preeminent humour writers. He's the author of the bestsellers Barrel Fever and Holidays on Ice, as well as collection of personal essays, Naked, Me Talk Pretty One Day, and Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim. And most recently, When You're Engulfed in Flames. His essays appear regularly in Esquire and The New Yorker. He was named as Time magazine's Humorist of the Year in 2001. What does David Sedaris find funny about America? Could it be the mention of steak fingers or appetizers available until 10 p.m, or the perfect picture of bacon left on the hotel bedside table? A big round of applause for David Sedaris.
Oh, thank you. As opposed to David Rakoff, who's on his way into the United States, I'm on my way out. I left New York 10 years ago and moved to France, and then I moved to England, and I was just granted indefinite leave to remain. So that means I can stay for the rest of my life, and then I can apply for my British passport, which is something that's exciting to me, the opportunity to do that. And I can keep my American passport. But still, it's something I'm not, again, I can stay so I don't have to do it. It's just, but thinking about doing it makes me think all the more about America, which is where I grew up. And, you know, when you live there, things are just normal to you, and then you don't really notice them until you leave. And I go back to the United States twice a year. I go on these lecture tours. So in October, I'll go to 31 cities, and I'll do the same in April. And like when I lived in the United States, I didn't ever realize how you can talk about money all the time, everywhere you go. So I'll go back to the United States, and I'll be living in France, where you cannot talk about money at all. Then I go back to the United States, and I'll be on a plane, and someone will say, one guy will say to another, "I like your watch." And guy number two will say, "Well, you should. It cost me $4,000. And I grew up with that, and I love that. Absolutely love it. Because I'm the one who will go into someone's house, and I will ask how much things cost. And in France, people are just appalled. Like, you're not even supposed to acknowledge somebody's sideboard, let alone ask how much it cost. And I was in a cab here yesterday, and I don't know where the cab driver was from, but he said, "Oh, I detect an accent. Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from the United States." And he thought for a moment, and he said, "How did you keep from being shot?" And I thought, he doesn't know how obnoxious I am, so it wasn't that kind of question. It wasn't like, how did I personally keep from getting shot? It's just that from watching the news, he gathered that America's an incredibly dangerous place. And I just went to Rio for the first time. And everything I read led me to believe that if I can make it alive to my hotel, I should double bolt the door and never leave. And actually, Rio wasn't bad. I mean, certainly nothing happened to me. But I could understand how from watching the news you would get that idea about America. How did I keep from, how is it that I never got shot? Well, then when you live there, there are places you can go to get shot. You know, like, and I know where those places are, and I try my best to avoid them. I wrote a story a few years ago. One thing that's always funny about America, that it can't yet, there are no limits to the ridiculousness. Guns, right? So I had included this in a story, that in Texas, the blind can legally hunt, but they need to be with a sighted person, right? But in Michigan, they don't. So in Michigan, a blind person can go out into the woods on his own with a gun and shoot at whatever makes noise. But how does he find whatever he shot, right? That's like even if he were to say, "That sounds like a deer," and he shot it, and then he heard it, the antlers like hit a tree, and so he knew that it was a deer, how would he find it, and how would he get it home? And then I was reading in the paper a while ago that in national parks, you're not allowed to bring guns into national parks like Yosemite. Well, the National Rifle Association wants that to change, right? And their argument is, what about our women? You know, how funny would you find it if your 16-year-old daughter were raped at Yosemite? How funny would you find it then? So, but they're afraid that if people can go into the national parks with guns, then they're just gonna shoot bears in the face, is basically what they won't be afraid as they should be of the wildlife. And so they're going to wind up killing a lot of animals. It's funny to me. Let's see. Let's see. And then I was going to just read this little thing because David read, and someone just handed me this book, and so I thought, why not? And this is American to me. And it's the beginning of a story called Town and Country. They looked like people who had just attended a horse show. A stately couple in their late 60s, he in a cashmere blazer, and she in a grayed tweed jacket, a jam-encrusted shamrock glittering against the rich felt of her lapel. They were my seatmates on the flight from Denver to New York, and as I stood in the aisle to let them in, I felt the shame of the tragically outclassed. The sport coat I had prided myself on now looked clownish, as did my shoes, and the fistful of pine straw I refer to as my hair. "Excuse me," I said, apologizing basically for my very existence. The couple took their seats, and just as I settled in beside them, the man turned to the woman saying, "I don't want to hear this shit." I assumed he was continuing an earlier argument, but it turned out he was referring to the Gershwin number the airline had adopted as its theme song. "I can't believe the fucking crap they make you listen to on planes nowadays." The woman patted her silver hair and agreed, saying that whoever had programmed the music was an asshole. "A cocksucker," the man corrected her. "Goddamn cocksucking asshole." They weren't loud people and didn't even sound all that angry, really. This was just the way they spoke, the verbal equivalent of the everyday China. Amongst company, the wife might remark that she felt a slight chill, but here that translated to, "I am fucking freezing." "Me too," her husband said. "It's cold as shit in here." Shit is the tofu of cursing and can be molded to whichever conditions the speaker desires. Hot as shit, windy as shit. I myself was confounded as shit. For how had I so misjudged these people? Why, after all these years, do I still believe that expensive clothing signifies anything more than a disposable income? That tweed and cashmere actually bespeak refinement? When our boxed bistro meals were handed out, the couple really went off. "What is this garbage?" the man asked. "It's shit," his wife said. "A box of absolute fucking shit." The man took out his reading glasses and briefly examined his plastic-wrapped cookie before tossing it back into the box. "First they make you listen to shit, and then they make you eat it." "Well, I'm not fucking eating it," the woman said. "We'll just have to grab something at the airport. And pay some son of a bitch $15 for a sandwich?" The wife sighed and threw up her hands. "What choice do we have? It's either that or eat what we've got, which is shit." "Oh, it's all shit," the husband said. It was as if they'd kidnapped the grandparents from a Ralph Lauren ad and forced them into a David Mamet play. And that, in part, is why the couple so appealed to me. There was something ridiculous and unexpected about them. They made a good team, and I wish that I could spend a week or two invisibly following behind them and seeing the world through their eyes. Thank you.